So our Torah portions, another double portion, adhere, which means after the death, kedoshim, which means holy. These portions come together. They begin in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 1, and go all the way over to chapter 20, verse 27. Now, I understand we've got quite a few visitors with us this morning. I wasn't here right at the beginning, but raise your hand if you're visiting with us, okay? Oh, look at there. Wow, that's a good number of people. Very good. So if you've not watched us online, you haven't been here before, we go through the Torah portions, and right now we're working in our favorite book of the Bible, Leviticus. Because that's our go-to book, right? Right. All right, Leviticus chapter 16, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death, adhere, or at the end of, or afterward, the mot, or the death. After the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they offered esh zarah, profane or strange fire before the Lord, and died. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil, before the mercy seat which is on the ark, lest he die. For I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. And so as we begin these double portions, the scripture begins to talk to us about the most sacred service of the year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. But I want you to notice that it is introduced to us within the context of Nadav and Avihu's death. And I take that to mean that, number one, he is emphasizing, as we just read, that no one, even the high priest, should take it upon themselves to just enter the holy place at their discretion, not just any time, or not just in any way. Because to approach our God means to follow a certain protocol, and we are to adhere to his standards. Now, we've all been taught that we can boldly approach the throne of grace. I agree with that. But boldly does not mean haphazardly. Boldly does not mean as I see fit in the way that suits me. Boldly means as Hadassah or Esther did when she went into the king. She honored, she respected the king and waited for the king to bestow his favor, and then she approached him. Boldly, she took her life into her hands, but nevertheless respectfully, honorably. And so if someone would do that for an earthly king, how much more so should we do that for the King of Kings? So there is a way we are to approach God. We adhere to his standards. So in this double portion, this is kind of being reinforced, I guess you'd say. But I also want to suggest something here. Now, it's not every year that these two portions are grouped together on the same Shabbat, but it's not uncommon either. It happens, just not every year. So I'm going to suggest something to you, at least for this season. With this double portion, it's as if God is encouraging us to turn the page. You know, winter has passed, springtime's here. To turn the page, to put the tragedy of the death of Nadav and Avihu behind us, to put that tragedy behind them, and now to continue on with what they were called to do and to focus on what he has called them to be, and that is kedoshim. Because that means holies, but it can also mean holy ones. You know, a lot of us grew up hearing the word saints. Well, in Hebrew, it would be kedoshim, holy ones. And so again, I want to just recommend that thought. That here he is encouraging the people to kind of put this behind him. It was a tragedy. It was unfortunate, and there are things to learn from it. But there comes a time to put that behind and now focus on what he has called us to be, holy ones. But the lesson is there, and what happened to Nadav and Avihu reminds us once again that we should do things the right way, not our way. And we should consider what it means and what is required of us if we are going to be holy unto the Lord. So on that note, adhere, in rabbinic commentary anyway, so take it for what it's worth, emphasizes so-called negative commands. In other words, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. Now, this is not acceptable. Those kinds of things. But kedoshim, which means holies, focuses on positive commands. And the ultimate positive command is this, to emulate our God who is holy. Leviticus 19, verse 1 and 2. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Now, it occurs to me that he is not going to tell us, challenge us, require of us to do something that it is impossible for us to do. Now, in and of ourselves, no, we're going to fall short. But when we are empowered by his Spirit, equipped with his word, he's not going to tell us something that he is requiring of us unless he's going to give us the tools, the equipment, the ability, the empowerment to do those things. Would you agree with that? So if he calls us to be holy, there's an expectation that we should be holy, set apart, right? All right, so in the Torah portion, Kedoshim, there's a lot of these so-called positive commands to give us an idea of what holiness looks like. Here's a few of them. Reverence for parents. Just won't let them to percolate for just a little bit. Reverence for parents. Consideration of the needy. Giving prompt wages for reasonable work hours. Dealing with our fellow man honorably. Here's a big one. No tale bearing. Dealing kindly with our neighbor. Treating a stranger with respect. Equal justice. Notice I didn't say social justice. Equal justice for the rich and the poor, and to have an abhorrence for things that are unclean. Here, in my view, is another big one. Not placing a stumbling block before your brother. Those are just some. There are others there. But the point is, the author of creation, the one who determines what is holy and what is not, the one who is holy, here are some things he tells us. I need you to do these things. And this gives us an idea of what he considers holiness to look like, which is kind of interesting to me because generally speaking, these things should be obvious to anyone who has any common sense. Amen. But I read it on a billboard somewhere not too long ago. Common sense isn't so common. But really, I mean, if you think about it, there are a lot of things in Scripture that are just common sense stuff. That's the way I see it anyway. Which means this, that some of these things aren't really terribly hard to do. Some of these things should be quite simple to do. Yet, somehow or another, we manage to make it harder. Would you agree with that? And how does that happen? There's this stuff called flesh. This stuff called self. So obviously, to be holy is calling us to deny ourselves. So anyway, these issues and others that are listed in or addressed in the Torah portion, these are things that we are called to focus on. And these are things that we are called to appropriate into our lives. And in so, we are striving to be a holy people who honor and respect the holy God. Now, when I was growing up in a holiness church, holiness was how you dress. You don't wear makeup, ladies. It should be obvious for should be. But we live in a different time and season. But anyway, you don't wear makeup, ladies. You don't wear a lot of jewelry. In fact, in the church I grew up in, you were only permitted to wear a wedding band, and that was it. You certainly do not go to a dance. You don't go to movies. You don't do these things. And so there was a lot of outward expression of what holiness looked like. Now, I am not putting that down, but holiness goes way beyond that, right? It goes way beyond not having a shrimp cocktail. It goes way beyond wearing tzitzit. It goes way beyond honoring the Sabbath and keeping the feast days. Here's the point I want to make. All these things that I just mentioned, could that begin to scratch the surface of the holiness that is our God? I mean, that is not the sum of who he is, right? Can I define him in these very limited ways, things that I am not dismissing, negating, diminishing in any form or fashion? Just saying that we can't define him with just those things because he has no beginning. He has no end. We can't comprehend him. He's beyond our ability to comprehend. We can't fit him into our tiny little finite minds. And so to think that these things define him in its entirety, no, I don't think so. Point again, holiness goes beyond these things. These are expressions of holiness. These are expressions of being set apart, and important expressions at that. But the whole idea here, idea is that as we go and to try to please him, we're striving to become a holy people who honor and who respect a holy God. So I'm going to give you an example of honor and respect as it relates to the Creator, and kind of borrow something from the Torah portion. That isn't really expressed, too dramatically, but it's certainly hinted at. Anyway, the vestments that the high priest wore typically on a day-to-day thing, had the ephod and the breastplate and the golden mitre and holy unto the Lord and all the different things that the high priest wore from day to day. Those things that he wore to perform his normal duties. Those vestments, including the golden mitre and the breastplate, were not worn for most of the Yom Kippur service. Those were not worn for most of the Yom Kippur service. Instead, for most of the Yom Kippur service, the Day of Atonement, the high priest would wear white vestments. And these were especially worn when the high priest would go in to do what was commanded him to do as it related to seeking forgiveness for him, seeking forgiveness for the people, and all those things. In other words, he didn't walk into the Holy of Holies asking for forgiveness, wearing gold and all the breastplate and all those kind of adornments. So on one hand, that speaks to the notion that no flesh shall glory in my presence. But Judaism believes that it's also to express this, that gold is a reminder of something. Can you guess what it might be? Golden calf. That gold is a reminder of the golden calf. Of course, what is the golden calf? That was that other lover that Israel had at the foot of the mountain when Moses was up at the top of the mountain speaking to God. And so at the foot of the mountain, they were committing spiritual harlotry with this golden calf. So in their way of thinking, to go in with all the gold and all the adornments would be like the high priest wearing something that might be a reminder of another lover. Now that's what they say. But here's why I find it interesting. Because, well, let's look at it this way. All of you men who are married, raise your hand. Okay? Now, let's say that long before you met the love of your life that you're married to right now, there was this other woman who had been in your life, and she gave you a present. Shirt, belt, coat, what have you. And all of a sudden, you and your wife are going to go out to celebrate your anniversary, and you think it would be a good idea to put that coat on. Any man who would do that is stupid. Okay, now, we have been stupid in times past, right? But it would not be a good idea to parade something in front of the one that you're devoted to. Now, I know that's apples and oranges, but there is a similar concept here and things that, and something that plays into what we're talking about today, and that is he is expecting a holy people to abandon their past. Man, you're just full of it today, ain't you? He is expecting us to abandon the ways of the past and to demonstrate loyalty and respect for your God, even when we don't understand what he's asking us to do. So in Leviticus 18, verse 2, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God, according to the doings of the land, I'm full of it too today, I guess. That South Georgia's coming out today, boy. According to the doings of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, you shall not do. And according to the doings of the land of Canaan where I am bringing you, you shall not do. nor shall you walk in their ordinances. You shall observe my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk in them. I am the Lord your God. And so this passage is just kind of underscoring what we just said. He's saying, don't duplicate what you saw in Egypt or your past, those things that you were familiar with back then. Don't do those things anymore. Number one, it's reminiscent of your bondage. But also, in some cases, it's reminiscent of your submission and maybe even your flirtation with the gods of Egypt. And we do know that was a problem. That's why there was a golden calf. So he's saying you don't need to do those things that are associated with the past. But in the same way, don't duplicate what you're going to see in the land of Canaan. Because you're going to see some things in your future that everybody's doing. And it's going to seem maybe like the right thing to do. Don't do that. In Egypt, idolatry was rampant. In Canaan, sexual immorality was rampant. And so these two societies represented, at that time anyway, some of the most morally decadent societies in the world. But look at it this way. God took Israel from one of the worst in that particular way, and then he led them to another worst. Now think about that. Took them from one place that was really bad for this, and then he brought them into a place that was really, really bad for something else. Now, one thing we can glean from this, God's people have always been charged with being holy, doing what's right, even when they're in the midst of corruption. Daniel came to fruition where? Babylon. That's why we know of a man by the name of Daniel. It's not his life in Judah. It's his life in Babylon. The three Hebrews that are mentioned with him, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Where do we see them sanctifying the name? It's not in Jerusalem. It's in Babylon, to the point that the most powerful man in the world has to acknowledge that the God of Israel is God. So again, God's people have always been expected to do what is right, to live a holy life in spite of the circumstances we find ourselves in, and especially when we're in the midst of idolatry and sexual immorality. You're a light in a dark place. You're a city set upon a hill which cannot and should not be hidden. So even though we are to be insulated from the ways of the world, we are not to be isolated from the world. And that means we're going to have to be very sober. We're going to have to be very alert about the environment that is around us and yet remain holy. We're going to have to be able to distinguish clean from unclean, holy from profane, right? So then, we need to abandon the ways of the past, those things that he says you need to discard. Everybody knows that. But also, we need to be careful about the things of the future because we're going to run into things that everybody else is doing, and just because everybody else is doing it is not justification to follow suit. Now, I know every parent in this room and grandparent gets that because we tell our children all the time, I don't care what they let their kids do. This is my house. All right? But yet, a lot of us, myself included, have been guilty of falling into the trap of following with the trends of society. And I'm not talking about the blatant, obvious things. I'm talking about the subtle things, right? This is just one example. I fought tooth and nail years and years ago. I didn't want a cell phone, but I was traveling a lot. So we felt it was a good idea for me to have a cell phone so Beth can get a hold of me and I can get a hold of her. And now it's like, right? All right. ... We need to pay attention to what's going on around us and how we are to represent our God. And so that passage that we read, he's going to take them out of Egypt and he's going to deposit them in Canaan, and things in some ways are worse in Canaan than they were in Egypt. The difference is they're not in bondage to Pharaoh now. They're God's people. He's their king, but he's going to put them in a place that they're going to be surrounded by just all kinds of decadence. So that prompts this question. Why would God do that? Why would God take them from Egypt's oppression and put them in a place that was arguably worse in terms of decadence, knowing full well that they are going to be exposed to the allure of these things that are present in the land of Canaan. And we know that because he warned them time and time and time again before they ever went into the land, right? So he knows that there's going to be this temptation. Now, before we answer the question, or try to answer the question of why we do that, we have to acknowledge something that's very, very important, something that is a fact that's true. And that is that God does not tempt us with sin. He doesn't do it. James says this, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. So that is a fact. That is a truth, and we have to establish that. Nevertheless, he took them out of Egypt, the seat of idolatry, what represented their oppression, and he brought them into a land that was infested with brazen sexual immorality, human sacrifices, and all that kind of stuff. Why? He doesn't encourage us to sin, but he does challenge us to do righteousness. Right? He does not tempt us with sin, but he does say, I expect you to do what is right. Psalm 97 verse 2 says that righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. And so then, if we are going to emulate him, we are to strive to live holy lives in spite of our surroundings. And the point is, we're going to be exposed to wickedness until the Messiah returns. Right? How then do we respond to it? Some of these things, I'm sure you've already got it figured out. But I want to address some things that maybe we haven't thought about a lot, maybe not at all. But how are we to respond to these things that surround us? Obviously, we have the Holy Spirit to guide us. Hopefully, you have the Holy Spirit to guide you. Hopefully, you've said, I need your Spirit to guide me. Okay? And if you haven't done that, then you need to get with the program. All right? Because if any of us think we can do this in and of ourselves, we're going to fall flat on our face just as soon as we get out the door. So we have the Spirit of God to guide us, but we still have to make a choice. We still have to make a choice. In Matthew chapter 16, I've used this example a lot for a lot of things. But you've got Messiah asking his disciples, who are men saying that I am? And then he turns to them and says, who do you say that I am? And Peter jumps up, you are the Messiah and the Son of the living God. Flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, Peter, but my Father in heaven, he revealed this to you. It was revealed to him by the Spirit of God. So he was led by the Spirit of God and he responded to what the Spirit of God was leading him in. But just a few verses later, Yeshua is talking about being delivered up and crucified. And the same guy who just said, you're the Messiah and the Son of the living God, the one he said, on this rock, I'm going to build my congregation. He turns to that guy and said, get behind me, Satan. You're not thinking like God. You're thinking like men. Point being, we have to be not only guided by the Spirit of God, but we have to respond to the Spirit of God. And not our soul and not our flesh and give into our way of thinking. So then again, the Spirit guides us, but are we allowing ourselves to be led by the Spirit? Or do we at times give into our own understanding? Do we at times give into our emotional tendencies? So in that context, that's why I'm asking the question, how do we respond to the wickedness in the environment around us? Being led by the Spirit, responding to the Spirit, or responding with emotion, responding with our own understanding. So I want you to consider this. Are y'all still awake? Yes. Okay. That's not what I want you to consider, but I want to make sure you're awake before you consider this. Divine justice, in simple terms, would seem to say that righteousness should be rewarded without hesitation. And that evil should be punished immediately. Certainly if we had our way. Right? If we had our way, we would want every good thing we've done to be rewarded right then. And we'd want all the evil people to be rewarded right then. you know it's true. Right? If we had our way. In other words, no waiting period. No waiting to see how this is all going to turn out and what's going to happen. It's decided then and there. But if God were to do things that way, evil hearts could be concealed beneath good deeds. In other words, let's put it this way. If lightning struck every sinner when they sinned, only fools would sin. Right? If God just administered immediate justice, you'd have to be an idiot to go out and do something like that. Would you agree with that? If right choices were immediately rewarded, the truth would be so obvious that everyone would rush to do it. Theoretically, without a change in heart, it would just be a habit. It would just be something we do because we know if I do this, I'm going to get a reward. It'd be like, be careful, Bill. Do what? Pavlov's theory. I'm way too Southern to know what that means, but do you want to explain what that means? Dogs that drool knowing the food is coming. Oh, okay. I was thinking about, the monkeys that do tricks, for treats, Okay, anyway. Same idea, okay. But that is the point. If God rewarded right choices immediately, everyone would be rushing to do it. But again, theoretically, without a change of heart. So then, God waits. He doesn't necessarily reward righteousness immediately. He doesn't necessarily reward wickedness immediately. He waits. And in waiting, he permits the opportunity for bad choices to be made and hearts to be revealed. God waits. He just waits. So that those who are truly striving for holiness really learn and truly perceive what is right and what is clean and what is holy. In other words, he rewards the truly righteous and not just those people who are behaving as robots, because they are properly rewarded when they show they can overcome the opportunity to do wrong. It's like Beth has told all of our children and their whole growing up, it's one thing to do the right thing when mom and dad are watching. It's another thing to do the right thing when no one's watching, right? Same concept. God's watching and he will allow, not tempt us with sin, but he will allow things to be there around us, giving us opportunity if we are so led to do what is wrong, because he's wanting to see who truly wants to pursue righteousness, who truly wants to pursue the kingdom of heaven, who truly wants to pursue him. So while you're meditating on that, let's read in Matthew chapter 5, beginning at verse 43. Yeshua said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the just and on the unjust." And here's what we want to emphasize. "For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore, you shall be," what's that word in Hebrew? Tamim. "Therefore, you shall be perfect. You shall be tamim, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." So if we're supposed to be tamim because he is tamim, that means we're supposed to be holy even as he is holy. And that means that we have to go above and beyond what everybody else is doing. We have to be those kinds of people who do what is right all the time, not just when it's convenient. In other words, if we only do what's right when it is convenient, have we really done the right thing? If we do what is right when the conditions are to our liking, have we done the right thing? Point is, he expects us to be holy and to behave righteously in spite of the unholy in spite of the unrighteousness. Because to do right when everyone else is doing wrong is what he asks us. To do the right thing even when everybody else is doing the wrong thing. And even if they're doing the wrong thing to us. Now, on the flip side of that, he waits. He often waits to punish the wicked after it is demonstrated that the wicked has indeed been exposed to the truth and has had the opportunity to know better. As evil as Pharaoh was, and God knew what was in his heart, still, did God destroy him at the very beginning, the first time he said, no, I'm not going to let these people go? No, he did not. He kept going back through Moses and Aaron, let my people go. And there were times he seemed to kind of buckle, and I've sinned, and pray for me, and all this kind of stuff. But then he would harden his heart again, and to the point that God hardened his heart. Point is, God waited. For that matter, when Satan first rebelled and sinned against God and was cast down out of heaven, why didn't God just go ahead and pinch his little head off right then and there? Have it done and over with. Why? Because in the end, no one will be able to bring an accusation against the righteous judge. Everyone will be able to see, all generations will be able to see that he is holy, he is just, he is righteous. And so he gives, yeah, go ahead. So he waits. And there is a purpose in that. Though that purpose may be concealed from us, there's a purpose in waiting to judge evil. And I have to believe that for a lot of us, that is a prospect that doesn't really appeal to us. In other words, we want him to do it now. And especially if we're really trying hard to do what is right and striving to do what is holy. In fact, those who are embracing righteousness are often offended when it seems that the wicked get away with it. They're doing their evil stuff, they're doing their wicked stuff, and it seems like they're getting away with it, and that just sticks in our craw, don't it? That just bugs us to no end. And especially when we're trying to do the right thing and all hell is breaking out in our lives, right? No, that was 2 amens, all right? And so then how can and why would a just God allow something like this to happen? And then some people, if they're not careful, they'll start thinking this way, well, maybe he's not just. Or maybe he's just not interested in my situation. Or maybe he's not interested in any of our situations. He's got bigger things going on in the universe. And then there are people who just don't believe that he has the power to do it. By the way, that describes Israel in the wilderness, those who had witnessed the Passover, the splitting of the sea, the manna, the voice from the top of the mountain. They didn't think he had the power to finish the job. Because when they got the evil report, he brought us out here to kill us. They went murmuring in their, that's what happened. So when we see these things, when the wicked seem to be getting away with things, and we're going through all kinds of stuff trying to do the right thing, we'll ask these questions. And if any or all of those that I just mentioned were true, any of them, he's not God. If any of that was true, if he lacked the power, if he was uninterested, if he wasn't, he's not God. All right? So I want to submit something to you. One of the greatest tests the righteous are going to go through is the one where in his wisdom, he has determined to withhold judgment to the point that it seems the wicked are unrestrained and those who do good are punished. Now, you know you've thought that before. Thank you. You know you've thought that before. We're trying to do right and it seems like we're being punished, and they're doing wrong and it seems like they're just getting away with it and they're just being able to do whatever they want to do. And there's that old saying, no good deed goes unpunished, right? There are times when it seems to some that God is slumbering, that he is unaware or he's uninterested. But I'm going to say something here, and I hope you'll be able to follow me on this. And this is connected to the idea that there's much more to his holiness than just the stuff on the surface that we tend to focus on. I would argue that what I've just described to you, that scenario, thinking the wicked are getting away with stuff and we're being punished for doing the right thing, in that scenario, it reveals his purpose where we are concerned, where his people are concerned, at least in part, of what is truly required of us to be like him. Because you see, he is the only one who knows when to administer justice and reward. Not if he will, but when. And he is the only one who knows how to administer justice and reward. Not if, but how. And you and I, we fall far short in that kind of thing. So here again is what I'm saying, that in that thinking the wicked are getting away with this and we're going through this because we're trying to do the right thing, and those question marks that come in our mind, through that God is revealing a purpose where you and I are concerned. And that is, again, what is truly required of us if we are to be holy even as he is holy. Because his holiness encompasses his ability to refrain from judgment when appropriate. Our desire for immediate judgment of others reveals we're not there yet. Are you following me here? Are you tracking with me here? All right. So now let's throw this into the mix. It's interesting that God will wait and allow for us to demonstrate whether or not we're going to do the right thing, or he waits to administer judgment to the wicked. But with Nadav and Abihu, it was instant. Justice came immediately. So you get what I'm saying here? He waits, and he's kind of waiting to see what we're going to do, and we're going to learn all this kind of stuff. But when Nadav and Abihu went in with the profane fire, they were immediately consumed, because they offered a fire that he had not commanded. They encroached on his holiness, and then they were met with immediate death. And here's my point. God doesn't have to prove that he's holy. Who shall I say sent me? I am that I am. That's all you need to tell them. So do we all agree? God does not have to prove to anybody that he's holy. God doesn't have to prove anything to anybody, right? He is God. He is holy. He is set apart. So then, respecting that, respecting his holiness is a prerequisite to becoming holy, even as he is holy. Did you follow me on that one? Respecting that if he says, I'm going to wait on this and I'm going to wait on that, because see, he's set apart even in that. Only he knows the when and the how. He's holy even in that. And so may not understand it. It may not jive with my flesh, but respecting and honoring that is going to be a prerequisite if you and I are going to be holy even as he is holy. In other words, the death of Aaron's sons made a very lasting impression. I mean, immediate impression, and a lasting one. And in fact, in the Torah portions we have here, God uses that event to press the point that you and I need to strive for holiness. Remember when it happened, his instinct was to grieve and to tear his robe, and Moses said, you can't do that. You can't do that. If you do that, you're going to die. And the congregation, they'll mourn for you, but you're going to have to continue doing what God has called you to do. So it made a very lasting impression. And again, God used that to press the point that I expect my people to strive for holiness. And holiness goes beyond the outward stuff that we tend to emphasize. All right? Please don't read into that I'm saying you don't have to do those things. It's not what I said. I'm saying it goes beyond that. The word adhere, as in achremot, it means at the end, afterwards. A lot of times it's used prophetically, but it hints at what is to be learned from this. What is to be learned from this very tragic experience? What is the end result of the tragedy that has occurred? How does it serve our good? Can we learn good things from bad things? We know that. Okay, so that's hinted at here. So in this particular scenario, nadav avihu, the instantaneous death, what's something that we can learn from it that works to our good? Here's what I thought of. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Okay? To acknowledge his holiness, not just in word, but in deed and thought, in every aspect of our life. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And wisdom says this: we should all be thankful that he doesn't immediately render justice for wrong choices. Do we agree with that? All right. Everybody should be saying amen to that. Well, if that is so, then we should be equally grateful that he does not immediately reward good choices. That was a little harder for us, right? But if the one is true, the other is true as well. So we should be just as grateful that he does not immediately reward right choices. God does not want robots. And that's why we have a free will. So then, everyone has to face an equal challenge and decide whether you're going to be a saint or a sinner. Everyone. And in the end, God is searching for those who desire righteousness, those who pursue holiness, in spite of seeing the successes of wickedness. There are a lot of wicked people who are very successful in their wickedness. All right? Why do the wicked prosper? Was asked, right? So this is a question that's been posed for a long, long time. But for us to emulate the holiness of God, we have to be subjected to the draw of sin. I can back that up because in Hebrews chapter 4, talking about our heavenly high priest, what does it say? That he was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin, right? So then likewise, though we're going to be tempted and though there's going to be this draw of wickedness and all these things that surround us, we prefer to embrace his truth. With all of the challenges that it brings to us, we nevertheless prefer that over doing what we know to be wrong. And what we know that in time will reap some bitter fruit. We choose that. And those are the kind of people he's looking for. And conversely, the wicked are given time to deny the truth. And how do they deny the truth? By their preferences. The things they would rather do, which always points back to self. So then, until the time comes that our Father in heaven decides to act in a fashion that is obvious to us, whether it's vindication or judgment, here is what we need to do. We need to turn the page. And we need to continue to press toward the goal for the prize of the high calling of God in Messiah, Yeshua. Right? Now, in that process, here's what I expect we would see, because we see this throughout history. As we go through the process of pursuing that, we need to realize that what some might call natural occurrences is in fact the hand of God, concealed perhaps, but the hand of God working in our lives and working for our good. If you didn't understand what I just said, there are a lot of things that happen in this world that people just think, well, those are the things that happen anyway. But if we're discerning, and especially when we as individuals and families in a congregation are kind of striving to pursue what he has for us, we need to understand that there are times that things happen that some will say, oh, that would just happen anyway. But we have to be able to recognize his hand at work behind the scenes. When Yeshua's coming into Jerusalem, it thundered. And lots of people heard it thunder, but a few people heard a voice. Right? That's what we're talking about here. We need to understand that there are things that, again, people might think, well, that would happen anyway, or this is a natural occurrence. And yet, it's God's subtle way of demonstrating that he's working in our lives and he's working for our good. And so we need to discern his hand, even though some people are just oblivious to it. Because if we are able to discern his hand in those subtle little ways he has, I'm going to suggest to you that's going to build our confidence more. Our faith is going to be built up. We're going to be encouraged. That doesn't mean that the thing is resolved and all is said and done and God has shown who's right and who's. That's not what we're talking about. It's just he's got a little way of saying, I'm with you. And to encourage you to keep doing what is right, to continue doing what is holy. Now, to be sure, the death of Aaron's sons, tragedy in general, is never to be forgotten. Its lessons are always going to remain with us. But I'm going to recommend to you that there is a time to grieve, whatever that is. There is a way to grieve, whatever that is. Aaron, when his sons were struck down. There's a place for those things to be grieved. However, there comes a time that we have to turn the page on the grief. We're not to dwell in the tragedy. We're not to dwell in those things that happen. Why? Because there comes a time we have to go from achoremot to kedoshim. We have to determine that we are going to press on, to turn the page and to be those he regards as kedoshim. And if we can't discern his purpose just yet, that doesn't mean there isn't a purpose. Just because we can't figure it out, we can't see it perhaps, doesn't mean there isn't a purpose. In time, he will act and he will demonstrate his righteousness and his justice in a way that is visible to us. But in the meantime, where we're concerned, he's still acting. He's still working. He just doesn't always let us see exactly what he's doing. Because if he let us see everything from the beginning to the end, we'd blab it. Some people would write a book about it. They would. And do you know who'd read it? Your enemy. The enemy of your soul. God's a good general. And he expects us, those who are part of his army, to trust his judgment. And if he doesn't tell us every little detail of the battle plan, that's because he's a good general. Right? And he knows what he's doing. And we're going to have to trust that he knows what he's doing and to have confidence that if he tells me to go here and to do this, attack there, stand here, that there is a purpose in it, even if it's beyond me to comprehend. Because he is not going to reveal everything to his enemy. He's not going to reveal what he's doing to his adversary. And so where we're concerned, as we're going through these kinds of things, even if his purpose is hidden from us, nevertheless, our future is taking shape. Consider this. Jacob was mourning the loss of Joseph, even as God was preparing for Israel's future. All he could consider was the loss. And it was grievous to him. I'm sure it was awful. But at the same time, God was shaping his future and the future of his children and his grandchildren and all of those that would come from him. We still talk about that today. So all of that is to say, if God waits to reward the righteous, or if God waits to judge the wicked, it doesn't mean that he isn't acting. It doesn't mean he isn't working right now. It's just that we don't always recognize his handiwork. You know, people are very quick to rationalize events and consider them to be natural occurrences. You know, earthquakes and tsunamis. You and I get to talk about those. Well, you know, I'm speaking this weekend at a prophecy conference. You know what some of those people who come to prophecy conferences like to talk about? Earthquakes and tsunamis and famines and who's the Antichrist and when's the tribulation begin and all those kinds of things. All right? And so we'll talk about those things, but what a lot of people will do, will say, well, you know, we've always had earthquakes. There's always been famines. There's always been tsunamis and these kinds of things. And that's true. But have they always been as intense? Have they always been as frequent? You see what I'm saying? There are people who are going to hear the thunder, and there are people who are going to hear his voice speaking. There are people who are going to be looking at the things that are going on in the world and saying these are just natural occurrences. And then there are going to be those people who are encouraged by these things because they see God at work. And there are people who just out of hand dismiss the earth's testimony that there was a universal flood, much less the Bible's testimony Oh, this was this, and they explain it away. But the people who place their confidence in God know better. We may not see blatant indicators today of what he's doing, but nonetheless, if we are led by his Spirit and we're allowing ourselves to be guided by his Spirit, we can discern his movements behind the scene. I mean, the book of Esther. I mean, that is the epitome of what I'm talking about here. There are too many timely coincidences to be coincidences, right? And yet God is never mentioned. So then, recognizing that God does work, he does move, he, yes, many times works behind the scenes in ways that aren't so obvious to most. Nevertheless, if we are looking, if we're discerning that, and when we see it, it should prompt us to continue to pursue holiness, even if he isn't rewarding us for it right here and right now. Do you understand what I'm saying here? All right, so then, we need to do what is right in the face of adversity, in the face of resistance, knowing full well that one day God is going to make it very obvious who has kept his will, who's kept his word, and who he has loved. Revelation 3. He's speaking to the congregation at Philadelphia. These things says he who is holy, he who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens. I know your works. I want to just pause there and just interject this thought. He knows their works because he's been watching. He's been observing. He may not have been speaking necessarily, or in a way that was obvious to everybody, but he's been watching. He has been observing. His eyes are going to and fro, and what is he looking for? The ones that are going to follow him, right? The ones that are going to follow the truth and embrace righteousness. The ones that are going to be true to his commandments. He says, I know your works. And so then, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, and that little strength seems to me, or that phrase seems to suggest they have a little strength because they've been through it. They've been through it. Life has happened, and they've had to hold on, and they've had to continue on. For you have a little strength. You have kept my word. You have not denied my name, my authority. Indeed, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. Indeed, I will make them come and worship before your feet. Not worship you, but worship before your feet, and to know that I have loved you. You see, for the people of God, those who are faithful, those who are walking in humility and obedience to him and striving to do what is right in spite of what everyone else is doing, and that includes doing what is right even to those who are doing you wrong. There is a day when he makes it public and everybody sees, I've loved you. He does that. And to know that I have loved you. Why? Because you have kept my command to persevere. So I'm preparing this message this morning, and I'm thinking about this, and this is all for me. This is for me, my family. This is for, I think, everybody in this congregation. I think this is for the body at large. All right? So as I'm thinking about this, you know how my mind can work sometimes. History comes into play. So I'm thinking about the concept here, and then Lincoln's second inaugural address comes to mind. And so just to kind of set the stage, everybody knows who Lincoln is, right? Okay. You know what an inaugural address is, right? Okay, just don't want to assume here. So, he's going to make this speech in a time when the country was still embroiled in this, very bloody war, this civil war. And even though the war was kind of coming to an end, the future of the country was still kind of uncertain. What's going to happen? What's the aftermath going to be? Because there's a lot of animosity. There's a lot of hatred. There's a lot of enmity. And the country was divided in every way that you can imagine. Not just north and south, but philosophically. There's this wickedness called slavery, and you got people on one side of the issue who are all for it and who are fighting and bleeding and dying for it, and some of whom think that God's on their side. They thought they were really good Christians, and they were for this. And then you got people on the other side who are just absolutely against it and are fighting and bleeding and dying to end it. And there's people on that side that are just as full of hate as some of the people on that side. And so this thing has been going on for this all these years. And people are wondering, how long is this going to go on? Where are you, God? Whose side are you on? And it was Lincoln who had previously addressed that particular question and said, words to this effect, we don't need to be worrying about which side God's on. We need to be concerned about getting on God's side of things, doing what is right. So that's, kind of the backdrop of this. But in this speech, he addressed the strain of the war on the country and the why. Why is all this happening? And so I'm not here to necessarily give a history lesson or, to somehow put American history on the level of biblical history. Really, when all is said and done, United States history, American history, as much as I love it and love to study it, it's just going to be a little blip on the radar screen of human history. That's it. It's not going to be the all in all. And I know that for some of us, that's really hard to believe. But it's the truth. All right, but nonetheless, in this speech, he says some things that the principle that he's conveying is speaking to what we're talking about today. I'm not going to read it all. The Almighty has his own purposes. He quotes scripture and says, "Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come. But woe to that man by whom the offense cometh." And then he goes and says, "If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which in the providence of God must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly we do hope, fervently we do pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Those are strong words that are addressing an issue, that is part of our past as a country. But the principle that I want to, again, convey to you is this man, in his situation, had to come to the realization God has a reason for doing and allowing. And it is to us to trust that the judgments of God are altogether righteous. And so if he allows things that are in our lives to go on, that are affecting our lives, if he allows them to go on, then we have to trust that he has a purpose for that. And it is to us to continue to do what is right in his eyes for however long it has to be until he decides to put an end to something. And so he goes on and he says, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we're in. And to that last phrase, I say, amen. As God shows us what to do, what is right, by His Word, being guided by His Spirit, let us continue to do the right thing regardless of what everybody else is doing, regardless of what all else is going on in the world. There comes a time we have to turn the page and focus on do the right thing, be set apart people, do what is right. So as I've shared before, these portions, Achrimot, Kedoshim, actually comprise what is called Lev Torah, the heart of the Torah. And so holiness, sanctification are the major themes in these Torah portions. And so, folks, we as a congregation, being part of this body, are called to be holy. And not just outwardly. As I said earlier, these outward expressions of holiness are just that. They are outward expressions. They in and of themselves do not completely define the God we serve and should not completely define us if we are to emulate His holiness. It goes much, much deeper than that. If He is holy, and that encompasses the fact that He says, I'm going to wait on this and I'm going to wait on that He knows what He's doing, He knows when, He knows how, not if, but He knows when and He knows how. And if that doesn't match up with our brain, the problem is not on that end, it's on this end. And so we have to honor and respect that and continue to strive to do what is right in His eyes, both as an individual and as a congregation. And where the congregation is concerned, let's be aware that as a congregation, we're only going to be as strong as the weakest that are among us. And where there is weakness, that weakness should be appropriately addressed with the eye on the weak becoming strong. And so those who are stronger and more mature in the Lord, we have the obligation and responsibility to help those who are not as mature, weaker, not inferior, just not where some are in terms of maturity in the faith. That is not to demean or diminish anyone. It's just, that's something that is addressed in Scripture. Because as a congregation, again, we're only going to be as strong as the weakest that are among us. Because where does Amalek attack? Not at the head of the column, not at the middle of the column. What does he attack? The stragglers, the ones who are weak, the ones who are falling behind. And so if you feel that's you, holler, say something, because if, we're focused, there's a cloud up ahead of us and we're trying to follow that, or a pillar of fire, we're trying to follow it. If you're falling behind and you feel like you're straggling, let somebody know something. We're not mind readers here. All right? Well, nobody cares. Nobody noticed. Well, maybe somebody didn't notice, but it doesn't mean they don't care. So speak up. Say something. Hey, I'm falling behind. I'm a little weak here. I need some help. All right? Is that fair? But this factors into why it is very imperative that we take this call to be a holy people very seriously. Holiness is the standard by which we live. And in nothing that we do or don't do should it ever desecrate His name. It should always sanctify His name. In fact, it is so serious that in some cases men have been required to give up their life to sanctify His name. Now, I'm not really itching to be a martyr. It's really not on my list of to-dos. Okay. However, I do want to be someone who is willing to lay down their life. By that I mean take up my cross and bear it, and to do everything the Messiah's called me to be. And I realize that, depending on where He's placed us in the body, there are certain responsibilities that this one may have, that one may not have. But all of us have the responsibility to die to whatever it is he's calling us to die to, whatever that is, and to be a holy people. Amen?